Hello, welcome to the news live on FeckTV.com with me, Chris Bennett, and Alan Noonan. Tonight's first story, Northern Ireland Director of Public Prosecutions, Barra McGrory, has made a decision not to prosecute 4 suspects over the murder of Sunday World journalist Martin O'Hagan in 2001. Mr. Hagan was shot in September of that year as he returned from the pub with his wife. The case itself rested on the testimony of Neil Hyde, who testified in return for shortened sentence. The testimony itself, though, however, has now been shown to be not credible. Mr. Hyde said that he was in his flat at the time, saw a loaded gun, left, and was not involved in the murder itself, according to his lawyer. The case itself now has been, well, essentially dropped due to no prosecutions being made. Yeah, in particular, the paper who the journalist was working for, the Sunday World, Jim McDowell's Northern editor for that paper, he said that he was disappointed, annoyed and angry. He asked, "Where is the justice?" And he added that today's decision will not diminish in any way or resolve to continue to try and get justice for Martin. I suppose the question is, though, what exactly can be done from here on, Chris? It is interesting, Alan. I mean, the problem with the case is, when it came down to it, that they had one witness and one witness alone, and the witness happened to also be involved within the case itself, and so obviously had given testimony in return for a shorter sentence for various other crimes that he pled guilty to. The problem with it was, though, that his testimony itself was not credible in the end, and therefore the case against the others were dropped because of them having no other witnesses. It is, clearly upsetting, obviously, for the family of Mr. Hagan to go for now over 10 years since the murder and to now get a result like this, which essentially says, where do we go from here? We're back to square one. It's a very difficult one. Yeah, absolutely, and very distressing news for the last decade. Wait that has been there for the family and the co-workers of that journalist. Moving on now to Dublin, where there has been a seizure of cannabis worth €180,000 in Dublin Airport. A Romanian national has been arrested and charged with importing 9 kilos worth of cannabis in cargo on an arrival from Spain. And this is also greeted with the same news from Dublin Airport, that 2 men have been stopped at the airport trying to take €35,000 worth of money inside in their clothing and also in their luggage. Now, those men have been detained for further 3 months so that Gardaí can figure out exactly why they were trying to take a flight to Belgium with €35,000 worth of money on them. But it seems that there's hauls and seizures going on all over the country with regards to drugs at the moment. Yeah, it does. It seems like Ireland is almost becoming some form of drugs hub with these things. I'm intrigued as to the €35,000 of where they would actually hide it on the body. Do they stuff it in a coat, something like that? It's an interesting one, but certainly good news for the old guys at the airport catching these people. Yeah, absolutely, and it follows on a major seizure as well at Kerry Airport. So I guess I would almost take the opposite view, is how many drugs were being smuggled into the country before they made these seizures, dare I say. But well, it's certainly it's an interesting point to make, and one that I suspect more will come out on further down the line. Our third story is again from the north tonight. The Belfast Daily has announced that former officers from the RUC and UDR have come together to form a secret society called the Brotherhood. The group has said that they are not about violent and armed action, but for the protection of the people and to stop PSNI brutality. They will have a Belfast leadership, although there'll be county commanders in all of the 6 counties. They'll have an overt presence on the streets in old uniform and a covert presence which will keep intel on the PSNI. Their main aim is to prevent Ulster falling back into a civil war, as they state. We spoke to the PSNI press office today, who have said that whilst they're not officially investigating this alleged group, they are aware of the rumours of them on social media sites. I don't find myself convinced by any unionist flag protest supporter kind of saying that there's police brutality when we see that these protesters are throwing petrol bombs, fireworks at police. There's dozens of police who have been injured so far in these protests. Yeah, so over 100 police officers have been injured there. And I can't understand for the life of me why some form of society would be needed in this case. If they're saying this potential
officers are saying that they're not going to be armed, that they're not going to be violent, yet their aim is to protect people from brutality. How are they going to do that without some form of violence? You know, how are they going to do that?
Absolutely. It seems like we're not going to set up this secret society that's going to threaten people, that's going to not threaten people. You know, it seems like its exact reason for existing would be to sort of subtly intimidate people.
Yeah, it's a shame that really these officers, I suppose, themselves haven't gone on record. Instead of saying something like this, instead of setting up an organisation which has hints of the IRA with it in terms of the way it's set up, hadn't gone on record and said in actual faith, we will support the process diplomatically, we will support the process politically, but we will not be there adding, let's say, another flavour, an undue flavour onto the streets. Yeah,
that's a good point, Chris, I think. We'll move abroad for our next story and heading over to North Korea, where the Committee for Peaceful Reunification of Korea, which is a body set up by the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, said that if the puppet group of traitors takes a direct part in the UN sanctions, the DPRK, that's the North Korean government, will take strong physical countermeasures against it. And this is all part of the ratcheting up of tensions ever since North Korea had its third nuclear test. And they further said that sanctions mean a war and a declaration of war against us. So the UN is planning new sanctions, and the danger is that if South Korea joins with these sanctions, that their North Korean neighbours are planning to declare war on them.
Yeah, it's interesting whether or not the rhetoric of the North Koreans will actually go as far as to have an actual war. I suspect not. I hope not, certainly. But this comes from 3 days of ratcheting up this rhetoric. We saw the North Koreans saying that they would now aim their long-range missile tests at the US directly. So far, sort of reports suggest that they couldn't actually reach the continental US at the moment, but potentially down the line it could be a threat. It's a very, very difficult situation at the moment in North Korea. The interesting thing is that even China, essentially their main ally, has turned around in the last few days and sort of said, you know, enough is enough. We've sort of washed our hands of you a little bit, because they are taking it far too far, I think.
Yeah, spot on, Chris. And it seems to be that it is sort of just this typical bellicose attitude from North Korea. We'll see what comes of it, but it seems to be at the moment to be just talk, if nothing more.
I would hope so. I mean, South Korea, you know, and North Korea obviously haven't concluded a peace. It's still a ceasefire as such. So they are still technically at war. Whether or not anything will spill over the border is waiting to be seen. But I would sort of, I suppose, end this part of the story on the fact that this is the most aggressive that North Korea have been since the death of Kim Jong-il, yeah. And I suppose the thought was that Kim Jong-un, who took over, was going to be a more Western thinking, a little bit more less combative, less controversial. But now it does seem that he is swinging completely back the other way in these threats. It's dangerous.
And so while you see a ratcheting up of tension in North Korea, there's actually been a decrease in the tension with regards to Senkaku Islands, a disputed island chain that both Japan and China were claiming sovereignty over. And the Chinese envoy, Liu Zhenmin, said that the island dispute can be controlled. Now, part of this is a positive development between the two countries. They're sending envoys to one another, and possibly there will be a summit between the two leaders about what exactly will happen between the disputed islands and the resources that are located near to these islands as well.
I mean, in terms of that's excellent news for a region that already has too many hotspots at the moment. I suppose in terms of that, do we see these talks, do we see these peace talks as essentially going to be the end of the issues over those islands?
I think so. I think that the summit will probably mark the beginning of the end, if not the end in itself. And I think that China realises that it really can't go around sort of bullying, dare I say, its other neighbours. It's already involved in another territorial dispute, I should say, with Indonesia. And meanwhile, Japan on the other side is involved in another territorial dispute with Russia on the Kuril Islands. So I think that both of them are seeing their international reputation damaged by what is a pretty petty squabble.
In terms of the islands, are we going to see them essentially then revert back to Japanese sort of sovereignty, I suppose?
I think what will happen actually will be acknowledged, that Japanese sovereignty over the islands will be acknowledged, but China will probably have joint access to any mineral, oil or gas deposits that are found near the island. There'll be some sort of partnership agreement set up with regards to that.
Not a bad result. In terms of the region and the area, though, the last sort of, let's say, few weeks, a few months have seen a real sort of spark off. Not only these protests, not only North Korea, but obviously various other disputes, as you mentioned, Indonesia. In terms of the sort of, let's say, the Southeast Asia region as such, do you see that as really the sort of the flare point coming in the next couple of months politically?
I'm not sure. It all depends which way North Korea goes, but I actually think that the flare point is probably closer to the Middle East with regards Pakistan. I think that the instability that you've seen there is much more dangerous. What do you think yourself, Chris?
I tend to agree with you. I think the Middle East does have to be closely monitored, and I do agree, especially Pakistan, with the political sort of vacuum, let's say, that was released. Although I do worry significantly about North Korea, and not just for the aggressive stance, but for their continued nuclear testing, for their continued long-range missile testing. It would only take, let's say, a miscalculation on either side to potentially spark war. Yeah,
while I wouldn't really worry about the long-range nuclear tests or nuclear missile tests of North Korea, possibly giving it a range to fire missiles to the US. I think that's almost seeing it from an American perspective. You have to remember that North Korea has plenty of mid-range weaponry where if the country was threatened with invasion, let's say it did invade South Korea and was pushed back by an allied coalition of American and Asian forces, I can see a state like North Korea that was threatened possibly firing nuclear weapons as a last
sort of the mad situation, mutually assured destruction.
Yeah, absolutely. And the big danger might be a nuclear weapon being fired at Tokyo or somewhere.
It could happen. Hopefully it won't, exactly. And we keep the diplomatic process going. Our final story of the night, slightly more light-hearted. John Mackey was left bleeding from the head after a 2-foot-tall owl knocked him to the ground and attacked him on Saturday. This was outside the Masonic Club in Inverness. Now, Mr. Mackey had heavy bleeding from his head wound, which he thought was a brick thrown at him, because that would be the general case for downtown Inverness on a Saturday night. But no, it turned out that when he looked around after stumbling back to his feet, there was a large owl perched on a van staring at him. So far, there have been no more sightings of the winged attacker, although people in Inverness are warned to look out for any owl sightings.
Have you ever been attacked by an owl, Chris?
No, I haven't, but I'm not a mouse or a small creature like that.
Does the story tell us the height of this man?
It doesn't tell me if he was let's say, height challenged, shall we say. But no, he suggested that he was outside the Masonic Club on his mobile phone, and he wondered whether the glare from the phone attracted the owl's attention. Maybe it was just pissed off at him.
I think that's actually my favourite detail, that the man was attacked outside the Masonic Hall by the owl, which slightly makes...
Maybe it was a Masonic plot then, really.
Exactly, of course, which makes perfect sense, really. That's the most logical conclusion that we can really take out of this story.
Absolutely, that's the only conclusion that we at FeckTV can take on that story, of course. Thanks for watching. This has been the news, live at 7 o'clock on FeckTV.